I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at Evergreen Gardens, dressed in the same crisp white shirt and black vest as the other servers, watching as my brother Ryan raised his champagne flute to toast his own brilliance. "And of course," he announced to the table of his college friends, his voice carrying that familiar note of casual condescension, "you can thank my restaurant recommendation skills for the incredible rehearsal dinner last night. Ember Salt is basically impossible to get into these days." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He paused for effect, basking in their impressed murmurs before adding, "Don't worry about Emma over there, guys. She's just helping out with the service today, family discount and all that." The table erupted in laughter as Ryan winked in my direction. Not one of them knew that the impossible-to-get-into restaurant he'd been bragging about for months was actually mine. Designed, financed, and built entirely through my own vision and hard work. What made the moment even more surreal was the fact that Ryan's entire wedding weekend was being bankrolled by the success of that very restaurant. The elegant 5-course rehearsal dinner he'd somehow managed to arrange at Ember Salt. I'd personally designed the menu and waived the $15,000 private dining fee. The premium open bar at today's reception, funded by the restaurant's wine, distributor as a personal favor to me. Even the honeymoon to Kyoto that awaited Ryan and Olivia was partially subsidized by my restaurant's partnership with a Japanese culinary exchange program, a connection I'd fostered during my 3 years training under Chef Tanaka in Osaka. My journey to this moment, silently serving drinks at my brother's wedding while he took credit for my success, began 2 years earlier on what should have been the proudest day of my professional life. After spending my 20s working my way through elite kitchens across 3 continents, I had finally secured the funding to open my own restaurant in my hometown. At 32, I had transformed the inheritance from my grandfather, the only family member who had ever truly believed in my culinary dreams, into the down payment on a historic waterfront building that would become Ember Salt. The grand opening was scheduled for a Friday evening in September. I had sent formal invitations to my entire family 6 weeks in advance, including a handwritten note to Ryan expressing how much his support would mean to me. My parents had responded with their typical mixture of concern and reluctant acceptance. They had always viewed my culinary ambitions as a risky deviation from the sensible career paths they had envisioned for their children. "We'll try to make it, Emma," my mother had said during our weekly phone call. "But you know your father's knees have been bothering him, and it's such a long drive into the city." The distance she referred to was exactly 22 minutes from their suburban home. Ryan, however, had responded with characteristic enthusiasm. "Of course I'll be there, sis. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll bring some of my business contacts, too. They're always looking for new dinner spots to impress clients." His promise had meant more to me than I cared to admit. Despite our complicated relationship, some part of me still craved my older brother's approval, a childhood habit I had never fully outgrown. Opening night arrived, and Ember Salt glowed with the warm amber lighting I had specifically designed to highlight the restaurant's central feature, an open kitchen where diners could watch their meals being prepared over a wood-fired hearth. The weathered brick walls were adorned with black and white photographs documenting our city's culinary history. Fishermen at the docks, the original farmers market from 1911, immigrant families preparing traditional meals in early tenement kitchens. Each detail of the space told a story about food, connection, and the invisible threads that bind a community across generations. My core team, handpicked from colleagues I had worked with over the years, executed the evening service with the precision I had drilled into them during our 2 weeks of intensive training. Marcus, my front-of-house manager whom I had lured away from a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, orchestrated the dining room with understated efficiency. In the kitchen, my head chef Lucia, who had been my roommate during culinary school, called orders with the calm authority that had always made her a natural leader. By 8:30 p.m., The restaurant was at full capacity. Food critics from two major publications were seated at separate tables, their identities not nearly as discreet as they imagined. A well-known local food blogger was documenting each course on his Instagram. The kitchen was performing flawlessly, sending out my signature dishes exactly as I had envisioned. Coal-roasted oysters with fermented chili butter, hand-cut noodles with sea urchin and preserved lemon, dry-aged duck with charred stone fruits and 5-spice. I moved between the kitchen and dining room, making brief stops at tables to ensure everything met expectations, while continuously scanning for any sign of my family. By 9:45 p.m., as the first seating began to wind down, I finally accepted that none of them would be coming. My mother had texted an hour before opening. "Your father's back acting up. So sorry, we'll try to visit the restaurant another time. Good luck." No message from Ryan at all. The reviews that followed the opening were everything I had worked for. A stunning debut from Chef Emma Chen, whose bold vision marries Pacific Northwest ingredients with techniques drawn from her impressive international training, wrote the city's most influential critic. Reservations quickly became nearly impossible to secure, with the online system filling up within minutes of new dates being released. Within 3 months, Ember Salt had been featured in 2 national food magazines and had attracted the attention of several celebrity diners who posted their experiences to millions of followers. What should have been a period of unalloyed professional triumph, however, was complicated by a strange pattern I began to notice whenever I spoke with extended family or old friends. "Your brother was just telling us about his connection to that hot new restaurant," my cousin mentioned during a holiday gathering. "Ryan says the chef consults with him on the business side of things," my mother proudly informed me when I visited for dinner, apparently unaware of the irony. Even my former high school classmates seemed to have somehow gotten the impression that Ryan was mysteriously affiliated with my restaurant's success. The pattern became clear. While I had been working 16-hour days bringing Ember and Salt to life, my brother had been carefully constructing a narrative that positioned him as the business mastermind behind the scenes. He never claimed outright ownership. Ryan was too clever for that. But through carefully calibrated comments and strategic omissions, he had created the impression that my restaurant's success was somehow a shared achievement. I first confronted him about it at my parents' house during Lunar New Year celebrations. Finding him alone in the kitchen, I asked directly, "Why are you telling people you're involved with Ember and Salt?" Ryan's response was a masterclass in injured innocence. "What are you talking about, Em? I'm your biggest supporter. I've sent so many people to your restaurant. I'm just proud of what you've accomplished." "That's not what I'm hearing," I persisted. "Mom thinks you're some kind of consultant for the business. My own friends are congratulating me on working with my brother on the restaurant." He laughed, placing a brotherly hand on my shoulder. "You're being way too sensitive. I just tell people how amazing the place is. Is it my fault if they assume I must be involved because it's so successful? Take it as a compliment. People can't believe my little sister did all this on her own." That phrase, "my little sister," carried the weight of our entire relationship dynamic. Despite being only 2 years older, Ryan had always positioned himself as vastly more worldly and accomplished. Throughout our childhood, he had been the golden child, student body president, business school graduate, and now partner at a downtown investment firm, while my culinary pursuits had been viewed by our parents as an expensive hobby that had inexplicably gotten out of hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I let the matter drop that day, chalking it up to Ryan's lifelong habit of positioning himself at the center of any success story within reach. My focus needed to remain on the restaurant, which was entering its critical 6th month, the point at which initial buzz either solidifies into sustained business or begins to fade. I had no intention of allowing family drama to distract me from the most important professional challenge of my life. The situation shifted from annoying to consequential. However, when I received a call from Marcus one evening in April, "There's something you should know," he said, his normally composed voice tinged with concern. "Your brother just called to reserve the private dining room for some important client dinner next week. He specifically asked for the chef's tasting. Menu at a 30% discount, saying, and I quote, 'My sister would want you to take care of this for me.' I told him I'd need to confirm with you directly." A familiar heat rose to my face, the same sensation I'd experienced throughout childhood whenever Ryan would volunteer me for something without asking, assuming my time and efforts were naturally at his disposal. "What did you tell him?" I asked Marcus. "I said all private dining requests need owner approval and that I'd check the calendar and get back to him," Marcus replied. "I figured you'd want to handle this personally." "You figured right," I said. "Thank you for bringing this to me directly." After ending the call with Marcus, I sat at my kitchen counter, staring at my phone and considering my options. The obvious response would be to call Ryan immediately and make it clear that he couldn't use my restaurant as his personal dining club, especially not with unauthorized discounts. But something stopped me. A lifetime of confrontations with my brother had taught me that direct challenges only reinforced his perception of himself as the reasonable adult dealing with his overreacting little sister. Instead, I texted him, "Heard you're looking to book the private room at Ember. Happy to help. Give me details and I'll make sure it's perfect." His response came almost immediately. "Thanks, Em. Dinner for 8 next Thursday. Bringing potential investors from Chicago. Need to impress them with my local connections. The usual chef's tasting is fine." The phrase "my local connections" crystallized something I had been feeling but couldn't articulate. To Ryan, I wasn't a successful chef and restaurant owner. I was a local connection, a convenient resource to be leveraged for his own advancement. In that moment, I made a decision that would set in motion everything that followed. Instead of confronting Ryan about his presumption, I would give him exactly what he'd asked for, an impressive dining experience, but on my terms. "Consider it done," I texted back. "I'll take care of all the arrangements personally." The following Thursday, I arranged to be absent from the main kitchen during Ryan's dinner. Instead, I worked with Lucia to create a customized tasting menu specifically for his party, featuring dishes that subtly showcased my journey as a chef. From the Chinese techniques I'd learned from our grandmother to the avant-garde approaches I'd studied in Copenhagen. Each course would tell a piece of my story, recognizable to anyone who knew my history. I also instructed Marcus to provide the full wine pairing at no additional charge and to ensure flawless service throughout the evening. What I didn't tell Ryan was that I would be observing the entire dinner from the small chef's office that overlooked the private dining room through a one-way glass window, a feature designed to allow me to monitor special events without being visible to the guests. From this vantage point, I watched as my brother held court at the head of the table, accepting compliments for the amazing restaurant he had discovered, and nodding knowingly as his guests expressed amazement at the quality of each course. "How did you ever get a reservation here?" asked one of the Chicago investors, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit. "I tried to book a table last month when I was in town, and they said there was a 3-month waiting list." Ryan smiled with practiced modesty. "Let's just say I have a special relationship with this place. Been coming here since before it became the hottest table in the city." Another man, younger but equally well-dressed, raised his glass. "Well, here's to your restaurant connections. This might be the best meal I've had all year." "The chef here really understands balance," Ryan responded, swirling his wine with the exaggerated motion of someone performing expertise. "I've always said that's what separates good food from great food, knowing exactly when to pull back and let the ingredients speak for themselves." I watched in astonishment as my brother proceeded to explain my own culinary philosophy to his guests. Phrases I had used in interviews, ideas about food that I had developed over years of intensive study and practice, all presented as his own sophisticated observations. The most surreal moment came when he began explaining the concept behind the 4th course, a dish inspired by a specific memory from our shared childhood. "This dumpling course is interesting," Ryan said, gesturing with his fork. "It's actually a modern take on something from our family tradition. Our grandmother used to make these on special occasions, but the chef here has elevated the concept with these seasonal ingredients and the smoked soy glaze." He was right about the inspiration. Our grandmother had indeed made similar dumplings during New Year celebrations, but the idea that Ryan would recognize this connection was stunning to me. My brother, who had shown virtually no interest in our culinary heritage, who had mocked my apprenticeship with our grandmother as playing house in the kitchen, was now claiming special insight into the cultural significance of a dish he would have barely noticed in another context. As the dinner progressed, I witnessed something I hadn't expected. Ryan's guests genuinely enjoyed the experience I had created. Despite my brother's appropriation, the food itself was communicating something authentic about my vision and skill. One woman closed her eyes while tasting the charred honey dessert, a visible expression of pleasure crossing her face. Two of the men engaged in an animated discussion about the technical complexity of the noodle course. Even as Ryan claimed unearned proximity to my work, the work itself was making its own honest connections. After the final course was cleared, and the guests had moved on to digestives, I slipped out of the office and through the back hallway that led to the main kitchen. I had seen enough. What had begun as an exercise in controlled observation had become uncomfortably voyeuristic, and I needed to process what I had witnessed. Standing at the pass in the now quiet kitchen, the main dinner service had ended, and an hour earlier, I found myself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions. There was the expected anger at Ryan's misrepresentation, certainly. But beneath that familiar irritation was something else. A strange sense of power that I hadn't anticipated. My brother could claim whatever connection he wanted to Ember, and Salt could position himself however he chose in relation to my success, but the fundamental truth remained unchanged. This restaurant, from concept to execution, was mine. The plates that had impressed his guests, the space that had provided the perfect backdrop for his business dinner, the staff that had delivered an impeccable experience, all of these existed because of my vision and determination. Marcus approached, clipboard in hand. "Your brother's party is wrapping up. They've gone through 3 bottles of the reserve Barolo, by the way. Should I add that to his tab, or are we comping it?" The question brought me back to the practical reality of the situation. "No comp," I said firmly. "Charge his card for everything except the standard wine pairing. And Marcus, when you bring the check, please tell him that the owner sends her compliments and hopes the dinner met expectations." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "With pleasure, chef." 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Dinner was a huge success. Clients blown away. Thanks for the wine pairings. Next time, let me know if you're in the building so I can introduce you to important people. These guys invest in restaurants sometimes." I stared at the message, noting how even his gratitude came wrapped in the assumption that the primary value of an introduction to me would be my potential benefit from meeting his important people, not the other way around. It wasn't just that Ryan failed to see me clearly. It was that the possibility my achievements might equal or exceed his own simply couldn't penetrate his understanding of our respective places in the world. Instead of responding to his message, I saved a screenshot of it. Something told me this interaction might prove relevant in the future. Over the following months, Ryan's special relationship with Ember and Salt became an increasingly prominent part of his professional and social identity. He brought dates there for milestone romantic evenings, hosted potential clients for power lunches, and name-dropped the restaurant in conversations where he wanted to establish his cultural cachet. Each time, he requested special accommodation, through Marcus, who faithfully reported these interactions to me. Each time, I authorized whatever experience Ryan had requested, while adding detailed notes to a document I had begun keeping in a secure folder on my laptop. The pattern might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the announcement that arrived in late summer. Ryan had proposed to his girlfriend Olivia during a weekend trip to wine country, and they were planning a November wedding. My parents were ecstatic. Olivia came from a prominent local family, had the right educational pedigree, and worked at a prestigious law firm, exactly the kind of partner they had always envisioned for their son. The engagement coincided with another significant moment in my professional life. After 14 months of operation, Ember Salt had been named the city's Restaurant of the Year by the Regional Dining magazine, and I had been selected as one of Food and Wine's best new chefs, a national recognition that typically launches a chef into the upper echelons of the industry. The profile in the magazine featured a multi-page spread with photographs of me in the kitchen, alongside personal reflections on my culinary journey and the vision behind Ember Salt. When the magazine hit newsstands, my phone lit up with congratulatory messages from colleagues and friends across the country. My parents called to say they had bought 3 copies and were showing them to everyone at church. Conspicuously absent was any acknowledgement from Ryan. When I finally saw him at our parents' house for a family dinner celebrating his engagement, he greeted me with his usual casual hug before immediately launching into details about the wedding planning. "So Mom and Dad are handling most of the costs, but we're thinking you could contribute by arranging the rehearsal dinner," he said, helping himself to a glass of wine in our parents' kitchen before dinner. "Olivia has her heart set on Ember and Salt, and since you work there, you can probably get us a good rate. We'd need the whole restaurant for about 50 people." I nearly choked on my water. "I work there? Ryan, I own the restaurant. It's literally my entire life's work." He waved his hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. Chef, owner, whatever. The point is you can make this happen for us. It would be your wedding gift to us. Mom already loves the idea." In that moment, I realized that Ryan wasn't simply being strategically obtuse about my professional accomplishments. He genuinely couldn't process the reality of my success. In his mind, my restaurant was successful because it was the kind of place he would choose to dine, not because of my talent or vision. My recognition in a national magazine registered as less significant than his wedding planning concerns. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain his self-image wouldn't allow for a full acknowledgement of what I had built. A full buyout of Ember Salt on a weekend night would normally cost around $25,000, I said, keeping my voice neutral. That includes food and basic beverage service for 50 guests. Ryan's eyes widened momentarily before his expression settled back into casual confidence. "Come on, Em. We both know you're not going to charge your own brother actual buyout prices for his rehearsal dinner. Family doesn't work that way." Before I could respond, our mother entered the kitchen, beaming with pre-dinner excitement. "Emma, did Ryan tell you about the rehearsal dinner idea? Isn't it perfect? Your little restaurant will get such good exposure from hosting Olivia's family. Her uncle is the managing partner at Westbrook Development. They build high-end properties all over the city." My mother's casual diminishment of my restaurant as a business that would benefit from exposure rather than a highly sought-after dining destination that was already turning away dozens of reservation requests daily was so perfectly aligned with Ryan's perspective that I couldn't help but laugh. "What's funny?" my mother asked, genuinely confused. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that direct confrontation rarely shifted my family's perceptions. "Nothing, Mom. Just thinking about some logistics. Let me talk with my team about the rehearsal dinner possibilities, and I'll get back to Ryan with some options." That evening, as my parents and Ryan enthusiastically discussed wedding venues and floral arrangements over dinner, I made my decision. I would host Ryan's rehearsal dinner at Ember Salt, providing the full experience he desired. I would ensure that every detail was executed perfectly, that Olivia's family was suitably impressed, that the event reinforced Ryan's carefully constructed image as someone with special access to the city's most exclusive dining experiences. But I would do it with complete clarity about what was actually occurring. I wasn't receiving a favor from my brother by being included in his wedding plans. He was receiving an exceptionally valuable gift from me, whether he recognized it or not. More importantly, I resolved that the wedding weekend would mark the end of this particular dynamic between us. After years of allowing Ryan to position himself as the primary character in a story that rightfully centered my achievements, I would finally correct the narrative, not through confrontation, but through a carefully orchestrated revelation that even he wouldn't be able to reinterpret. I returned to my apartment that night and opened the document I had been maintaining for months. Titled simply Ryan's Special Relationship, it detailed every interaction my brother had had with my restaurant. Each reservation made with the expectation of special treatment, each discount requested and granted, each instance where he had positioned himself as specially connected to Ember and Salt while minimizing my role. After updating it with notes from our recent conversation, I began drafting a second document, a detailed plan for the rehearsal dinner and wedding weekend that would serve as the backdrop for what I had come to think of as my long-overdue professional coming out to my own family. The rehearsal dinner would be just the beginning. My brother's wedding was about to become the setting for a very different kind of revelation than he had planned. The morning after agreeing to host Ryan and Olivia's rehearsal dinner, I met with my executive team at Ember and Salt. We gathered in the private dining room 2 hours before the restaurant would open for lunch service, the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating the polished wood table where Marcus, Lucia, and I sat reviewing the previous night's service reports. "I need to discuss something important," I said after we'd finished our operational review. "My brother's wedding is in 6 weeks, and I've decided to host his rehearsal dinner here. It'll be a full buyout on the Friday evening, approximately 50 guests." Marcus and Lucia exchanged a quick glance. Both had heard enough stories about Ryan over the past year to understand the complexity beneath this seemingly straightforward announcement. "A full buyout? For your brother who still introduces you as working at that new restaurant?" Lucia asked, raising an eyebrow. My head chef had never been one to filter her thoughts, which was precisely why we'd remained friends since culinary school. "The very same," I confirmed. "But this isn't just about doing my brother a favor. I'm viewing it as an opportunity to finally clarify some misconceptions about my role here, not just to Ryan, but to my entire family and his social circle." Marcus leaned forward, his restaurant manager's mind already calculating logistics. "What kind of experience are you envisioning? Standard dinner service format or something more customized?" "Completely customized," I replied. "I want to create a tasting menu that tells the story of my culinary journey, from my grandmother's kitchen to the present. Each course will represent a significant chapter in my development as a chef. We'll pair it with a narrative element, perhaps small cards explaining the inspiration behind each dish. And I want to be visible, not hidden in the kitchen, but actively presenting and explaining the courses." Lucia nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. "You're making it impossible for him to maintain the fiction that you're just tangentially connected to this place." "Exactly," I said. "For too long, I've allowed Ryan to position himself as somehow responsible for or associated with my success. The rehearsal dinner will serve as a gentle but unmistakable correction to that narrative." "And you think this approach will work? No offense, Emma, but your brother seems particularly skilled at reinterpreting reality to maintain his self-image," Marcus pointed out. His observation was fair. Ryan possessed a remarkable ability to absorb and reframe information that contradicted his preferred narratives. It was a skill that had served him well in business. He could convince almost anyone of almost anything, but it had created a persistent distortion in our family dynamics. "You're right," I acknowledged, "which is why the rehearsal dinner is just phase 1. Phase 2 will unfold at the actual wedding reception the following day." I proceeded to outline my complete plan for the wedding weekend, a strategy that would make my position unmistakably clear without creating the kind of direct confrontation that Ryan could easily dismiss or reinterpret. By the time I finished explaining, both Lucia and Marcus were smiling with appreciative understanding. "It's elegant," Marcus said finally. Professionally executed, impossible to misinterpret, yet not overtly confrontational. Very you, chef. I'm in, Lucia declared. This menu is going to be the most personal work we've done since opening. Let's make it unforgettable. With my core team on board, I spent the next 2 weeks developing the rehearsal dinner experience. Each dish would represent a significant moment in my culinary evolution, a refined version of the first dish my grandmother taught me to make when I was 7, a course inspired by my first professional kitchen position in New York, a technique mastered during my year in Denmark, a flavor combination discovered while traveling through rural Japan. The final course would embody Ember Salt itself, the culmination of all these influences, shaped by my personal vision and the bounty of the Pacific Northwest. While the culinary development progressed smoothly, the emotional landscape proved more challenging to navigate. Ryan called repeatedly with suggestions for the rehearsal dinner, each one demonstrating his fundamental misunderstanding of both restaurant operations and my position within Ember Salt. I think we should offer guests a choice of entrees, he said during one call. Some of Olivia's family are pretty traditional eaters. They might not go for your fancy chef stuff. Ryan, that's not how tasting menus work, I explained, pinching the bridge of my nose. The experience is about progression and narrative. We can accommodate dietary restrictions, but offering a choice defeats the entire purpose. Well, just think about it, he persisted. And make sure there's plenty of that special reserve wine available, the Barolo I had last time. Olivia's uncle is a serious wine collector. I didn't bother explaining that the special reserve Barolo he referenced was a small production Italian wine that retailed for over $200 per bottle and was allocated to restaurants in limited quantities. Instead, I simply made a note to ensure we had enough on hand, adding it to the growing list of expenses that Ryan seemed to assume would be absorbed as part of my gift to the couple. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ryan and Olivia requested a tasting of the rehearsal dinner menu. I scheduled it for a Monday afternoon when the restaurant was closed, arranging for Lucia and 2 line cooks to prepare abbreviated versions of each course while Marcus set a table in the main dining room. Olivia arrived first, punctual and professionally polished in a way that reflected her corporate law background. I had met her several times at family gatherings but had never spent significant time with her one-on-one. She greeted me with genuine warmth, complimenting the restaurant space immediately. "This is my first time seeing it during daylight hours," she said, gesturing to the way the natural light illuminated the architectural details of the restored building. "The exposed beams are original to the structure?" "Yes, from 1908, I confirmed, surprised and pleased by her interest. "We uncovered them during renovation and decided to make them a feature rather than concealing them again." "Smart choice. It creates such a sense of history and place," she observed. "Ryan always talks about how much he loves the atmosphere here, but I don't think he's ever mentioned the architectural elements specifically." Her comment contained no obvious criticism of my brother, yet somehow communicated a clear-eyed understanding of his limitations. It made me wonder how much Olivia actually knew about Ryan's habit of positioning himself at the center of others' accomplishments. Ryan arrived 20 minutes late, full of apologies about a client call that wouldn't end, and immediately dominating the space with his presence. He greeted me with a quick hug before launching into a critique of the table setting. "I thought we'd be in the private dining room," he said, frowning slightly. "That's where we'll be for the actual dinner, right? This table is fine for today, I guess, but it doesn't have the executive feel I was hoping for." "The private dining room is being used for staff training today," I said, the lie coming easily. In truth, I had deliberately chosen the main dining room because it offered better lighting for the food photography I had arranged, documentation that would prove useful later. But yes, the rehearsal dinner will be in the private space, though we'll actually be opening up the sliding walls to use the entire restaurant since your guest count is now at 54. Perfect, Ryan said, either missing or ignoring the hint about the expanding guest list he'd provided only yesterday. Let's get started. We have another appointment at 4. What followed was a 7-course tasting with wine pairings that should have taken at least 2.5 hours, compressed into a rushed 90 minutes by Ryan's constant checking of his watch and abbreviated comments on each dish. While Olivia asked thoughtful questions about ingredients and techniques, Ryan seemed primarily concerned with how each course would be perceived by his colleagues and future in-laws. "This is the entree?" he asked when the 5th course arrived. A perfectly executed Wagyu short rib that had been slow-cooked for 48 hours before being finished over the wood fire. "It seems a little small. Harrison Davis is coming. He played linebacker in college. He's going to want something substantial." "Each guest will receive this portion as part of the progression," I explained. "By the time they reach this course, they will have already enjoyed 4 preceding dishes. Trust me, no one will leave hungry." Ryan remained skeptical, but Olivia intervened smoothly. "The portion is perfect, Emma, and it's incredibly tender. I've never had short rib with this texture before. What's your secret?" "It's a technique I learned in Osaka," I began, only to be interrupted by Ryan's phone ringing. "Sorry, have to take this," he said, standing abruptly. "Why don't you two continue? I'll just be a minute." His minute stretched to 15, during which Olivia and I continued through the final courses. Without Ryan present, our conversation flowed more naturally. I found myself genuinely enjoying her company and her thoughtful engagement with the food. "This dessert is extraordinary," she said, savoring the last component of the tasting, a charred honey custard with fermented plum and shiso. "It's simultaneously familiar and completely unexpected." "That's exactly what I was aiming for," I replied, feeling a surge of professional satisfaction at her precise articulation of my intent. "It's inspired by a traditional Chinese dessert my grandmother made, but reinterpreted through techniques I developed here." Olivia set down her spoon and looked at me directly. "Emma, I just want to say how much I appreciate you doing this for us. I know a full buyout of a restaurant of this caliber is an enormous gift." Her acknowledgement, so straightforward compared to Ryan's entitled assumptions, caught me off guard. "Thank you for recognizing that," I said carefully. To be honest, I wasn't sure if Ryan had explained the actual value of what we're providing. A flicker of something, embarrassment, resignation, crossed her face. "Let's just say I've learned to verify information from multiple sources," she said with a small smile that contained volumes of unspoken understanding about my brother's relationship with objective reality. Before I could respond, Ryan returned, full of apologies and ready to discuss logistics for the big day. As we wrapped up the tasting, I provided them with a detailed outline of how the rehearsal dinner would unfold, including my role as both host and culinary guide throughout the evening. "Wait, you're going to be explaining the dishes to everyone?" Ryan asked, frowning slightly. "Won't that take you away from the kitchen?" "Lucia will manage the kitchen execution," I explained. "My primary role that evening will be as your host, introducing each course and sharing the culinary story behind it." Ryan looked genuinely confused. "But don't you need to be cooking?" "I told everyone my sister is preparing this special menu personally." "I developed every dish on this menu," I replied evenly. "But modern restaurants operate as teams, Ryan. No chef cooks every component of every dish themselves. That's not how professional kitchens function." "Well, I guess you know best," he said, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "Just make sure everything is perfect. Olivia's family has very high standards." After they left, I sat alone at the tasting table, surrounded by the empty plates and wine glasses that told the story of my culinary journey. A story that Ryan had just compressed, interrupted, and partially missed while simultaneously claiming, ownership of it to impress his fiancé's family. The interaction crystallized exactly why my planned revelation during the wedding weekend had become necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, my closest friend since middle school and one of the few people who fully understood the complex dynamics with my brother. How did the tasting go? Did Ryan take credit for inventing the concept of restaurants yet? Her message made me laugh despite my frustration. I typed back, "Not quite, but he did explain to me how kitchens work. Also, apparently, I'm personally cooking every dish for 54 people simultaneously." Sophia's response was immediate. "Classic Ryan. Still proceeding with Operation Truth Bomb at the wedding?" "Absolutely," I confirmed. In fact, today only strengthened my resolve. The following week passed in a blur of preparation. Beyond the rehearsal dinner planning, I was coordinating with Evergreen Gardens about my role at the actual wedding reception the next day. Presenting myself as a representative of Ember Salt, catering a small dessert station for the cocktail hour, I had secured a strategically positioned table near the entrance to the grand ballroom. Few questions were asked. The wedding venue was delighted to offer guests an additional experience from the city's most acclaimed restaurant, especially at no extra charge. 3 days before the wedding, my mother called, her voice tinged with that particular blend of anxiety and criticism that always emerged around family events. "Emma, are you sure you can handle this rehearsal dinner? Ryan says you've been so busy with the restaurant lately. We could always move it to the country club if you're feeling overwhelmed." The suggestion that I might be incapable of executing a dinner in my own restaurant would have been laughable if it weren't so consistent with my family's perception of my professional capabilities. Despite national recognition and a restaurant with a 3-month waiting list, they still regarded my career with a mixture of confusion and concern, as though cooking were a peculiar hobby I had inexplicably turned into a job. "Everything is well in hand, Mom," I assured her. "The menu is finalized, the wine pairing selected, and the staffing arranged. It's going to be a special evening." "Well, if you're sure," she said, unconvinced. "Oh, and Ryan mentioned you might be understaffed for service. Your father and I thought perhaps you could hire a few extra servers just for the night. We'd be happy to cover that cost." I closed my eyes, counting silently to 10. Ryan's presumption that my restaurant, which routinely handled service for over 100 guests per night with military precision, would somehow be understaffed for his dinner, was so perfectly, irritatingly on brand that I couldn't even muster genuine anger. "Our regular service team is more than adequate," I said firmly. "Marcus has already arranged the staffing schedule to ensure impeccable service throughout the evening." "If you say so, dear," my mother replied, her tone suggesting she remained skeptical. "Oh, and one more thing. Ryan says the dinner might run a bit over the expected time. He's arranged for some of his college friends to make toasts, and you know how they can go on. Will that be a problem for your staff?" "We've blocked the entire evening," I said, not mentioning that each additional hour would normally incur a substantial fee. "The space is yours until midnight if needed." After ending the call, I texted Sophia. "My mother just offered to hire extra servers for the rehearsal dinner because Ryan thinks my professionally staffed, nationally recognized restaurant might not be up to the challenge of serving his friends." Her response was immediate. "Please tell me this is making it into your wedding speech." I laughed, though I hadn't actually planned to give a speech. But Sophia's suggestion planted a seed that would later bloom into an important component of my weekend strategy. The day before the rehearsal dinner, I arrived at Ember Salt at 7 a.m., a full 5 hours before our usual pre-service preparations would begin. The restaurant was hushed and still, morning light filtering through the windows and highlighting the rich textures of wood, brick, and steel that define the space. This early quietude had become a ritual for me before significant events, a moment to center myself in the physical manifestation of my vision before the controlled chaos of service began. I walked slowly through the dining room, adjusting a chair here, straightening a light fixture there, seeing the space through the eyes of the guests who would fill it tomorrow evening. I continued into the kitchen, running my hand along the smooth stainless steel counters, checking the edge on my favorite knife, feeling the particular comfort that comes from standing in a space designed to your exact specifications. I thought, "I might find you here," came Lucia's voice from the kitchen doorway. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the shop down the street and handed one to me. Pre-battle meditation? I smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. Something like that. Just reminding myself why we're doing this. You mean beyond executing a flawless dinner service? Because that's just another Friday for us, she said, leaning against the counter. This is about something more personal. It is, I admitted. Maybe it seems petty, focusing so much energy on correcting my brother's narrative about my restaurant. But it's not just about Ryan taking unearned credit. It's about finally being seen accurately by my own family. Lucia considered this, sipping her coffee. It's not petty to want your work recognized for what it is, especially when you've dedicated your life to it. Most people would have confronted him directly months ago, probably in far less elegant ways. Her validation eased something in me, a nagging worry that my elaborate plan might reflect some personal failing rather than a necessary recalibration of a lifelong imbalance. Thanks for that. And for being here at this ungodly hour. Where else would I be? Tomorrow's menu is the most important we've done since opening, she said matter-of-factly. Besides, I wouldn't miss seeing Ryan's face when he finally realizes his little sister isn't just playing restaurant. We spent the morning conducting a detailed inventory, confirming deliveries of specialty ingredients, and testing the final versions of each dish for the rehearsal dinner. By the time the rest of the staff began arriving for regular service preparations, we had refined every component to perfection. That evening, I hosted a brief meeting with the entire staff who would be working the rehearsal dinner. Standing in the center of the dining room, surrounded by servers, line cooks, bartenders, and dishwashers, many of whom had been with me since opening day, I felt a surge of gratitude for this team that had helped build Ember and Salt into what it had become. Tomorrow isn't just another service, I explained. It's a personal milestone for me. Some of you have heard stories about my brother Ryan over the past year. This elicited knowing smiles from the longer-tenured staff members. Tomorrow's dinner is an opportunity to clarify some misconceptions about who I am and what we've built together. I need every aspect of the experience to be flawless, not just to impress my brother's guests, but to make a clear statement about our standards and my leadership. Marcus stepped forward. We understand, Chef. Every member of this team knows what Ember and Salt represents and the vision that guides us. Tomorrow will be a service worthy of that vision. His words, and the collective nods of agreement from the assembled staff, touched me deeply. Whatever gaps in recognition existed in my family relationships, here was a community that understood exactly who I was and what I had created. Later that night, I found myself unable to sleep. Mentally, reviewing every detail of the coming day. It wasn't anxiety about the dinner service itself. We had executed far more complex events without incident, but rather a heightened awareness of what this particular service represented personally. After tossing in bed for an hour, I gave up on sleep and instead sat at my kitchen counter with a notebook, drafting what had evolved from Sophia's joking suggestion into an actual plan. A brief speech I would deliver at the rehearsal dinner. The words came easily once I began writing, flowing from years of unspoken thoughts about my relationship with Ryan and my family's perception of my career. I crafted each sentence carefully, aiming for clarity without accusation, confidence without arrogance. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking over the city skyline visible from my apartment windows. I read through the speech once more, made a few final adjustments, and then finally allowed myself to rest for a few hours before the day began in earnest. The morning of the rehearsal dinner arrived with surprising calm. I woke feeling clear-headed, and focused, the previous night's insomnia having burned away any lingering doubts about my approach. I dressed in everyday clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, knowing I would change at the restaurant into the attire I had carefully selected for the evening. Not chef's whites, which would reinforce Ryan's perception of me as primarily a cook, but a tailored black dress that signaled my position as owner and creative director. At the restaurant, the energy was focused and purposeful as final preparations unfolded according to our meticulously planned schedule. The private dining room and main restaurant space had been transformed, the usual table arrangements reconfigured to create a single long table that would accommodate all 54 guests. Custom menu cards detailing each course and its significance in my culinary journey were positioned at every place setting, along with specially commissioned porcelain chopstick rests, a nod to my grandmother's influence on my cooking. By 5 p.m., every component was in place. The staff gathered for a final pre-service meeting, dressed in the custom uniforms I had designed specifically for special events. Charcoal gray with subtle amber accents that echoed the restaurant's name and aesthetic. I surveyed the assembled team with pride, seeing in their professional preparation the embodiment of everything Ember and Salt represented. Tonight isn't just about serving food, I told them. It's about telling a story, my story, but also our collective story as a restaurant. Each interaction with a guest, each perfectly executed dish, each seamless transition between courses contributes to that narrative. At 5:45 p.m., I changed into my dress and took a final walk through the space, adjusting a flower arrangement here, repositioning a candle there, small gestures that helped center me before guests would arrive. At precisely 6 p.m., Marcus opened the doors to welcome the wedding party for pre-dinner champagne and canapés. Ryan and Olivia entered first, followed by their parents and closest friends. My brother moved through the space with his characteristic confidence, greeting me with a quick kiss on the cheek before immediately beginning to point out features of the restaurant to Olivia's parents, as though giving a tour of his own home. The original brick walls are from 1908, he explained, echoing information I had shared with Olivia during the tasting. And they sourced the dining tables from reclaimed timber that was salvaged from an old warehouse down by the harbor. They, in his narrative, was particularly telling, a linguistic distancing that positioned him as knowledgeable insider while simultaneously separating himself from direct responsibility for the restaurant's creation. I caught Olivia's eye over her mother's shoulder and saw a flicker of recognition at this characteristic maneuver, which she acknowledged with the slightest shake of her head. As more guests arrived, I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, personally greeting each one with the warm hospitality that had become Ember and Salt's signature. To most, I introduced myself simply as Emma Chen, founder of Ember and Salt, noting with quiet satisfaction the flickers of surprise on faces that registered the disconnect between this information and whatever Ryan had previously told them about my role. At 6:30 p.m., Marcus discreetly signaled that all guests had arrived, and I moved to the head of the long table to welcome everyone officially. The room quieted as I began to speak. Good evening, and welcome to Ember and Salt. I'm Emma Chen, and it is my profound pleasure to host this celebration for my brother Ryan and his fiancée Olivia on the eve of their wedding. I paused, scanning the room and noting with satisfaction that I had everyone's complete attention, including Ryan's, who looked slightly startled to see me taking such a central role. Tonight's dinner tells a story, not just of Ryan and Olivia's journey toward marriage, but of my own culinary journey that led to the creation of this restaurant. Each course you'll experience represents a chapter in that story, from my earliest memories cooking with my grandmother to my training across 3 continents, and finally to the vision that became Ember and Salt. As I continued outlining the evening ahead, I noticed something shift in the room's energy. A growing recognition among the guests that this was not simply a nice restaurant Ryan had selected for his rehearsal dinner, but a personal and professional expression of his sister's life's work. It was the beginning of the narrative correction I had planned. unfolding exactly as I had envisioned. The evening progressed with the precision of a theatrical production. Each course emerged from the kitchen exactly on cue, presented first to Ryan and Olivia as the guests of honor, then served simultaneously to each guest by our synchronized service team. Before each course, I stood at the center of the room and shared the story behind the dish. The grandmother who taught me to respect ingredients, the mentor in New York who drilled technique into my hands until it became instinct, the chef in Copenhagen who challenged me to question every assumption about flavor and composition. Ryan's expression evolved throughout the meal from his initial surprise at my central role to a visible recalculation of how to position himself within this unexpected narrative. I watched as he attempted several times to interject commentary about dishes, only to find himself awkwardly redundant after my detailed explanations. By the fourth course, he had shifted strategies, now nodding knowingly at my presentations as though confirming information he had always possessed. What I hadn't anticipated was the genuine engagement of the other guests. Olivia's father, a reserved man who had said little during the pre-dinner reception, began asking thoughtful questions about technique. Ryan's college friends, whom I had expected to be most firmly entrenched in his version of reality, expressed surprise and admiration at learning the full extent of my culinary background. Even my parents, seated near the center of the table, seemed to be seeing me through new eyes as they observed others' responses to the story of my professional journey. After the dessert course, the charred honey custard that represented Ember Salt's synthesis of tradition and innovation, I signaled to Marcus for the special reserve port we had selected to conclude the meal. As servers poured the deep ruby liquid into delicate glasses, I moved once more to the head of the table for a final address. This was the moment I had prepared for during my sleepless night, not just a conclusion to the dinner, but a gentle yet unmistakable correction to years of narrative imbalance. As I raised my own glass, I felt a profound calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had created this moment of clarity through my own vision and determination, just as I had created the restaurant itself. Before we conclude this evening, I want to offer a toast to Ryan and Olivia as they begin their journey together. All eyes turned to me, glasses raised in anticipation. The room glowed with candlelight, the faces of family and friends expectant in the warm illumination. Tomorrow, my brother will marry an extraordinary woman, I continued. Their celebration represents the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a chapter they will write together, each contributing their unique strengths and perspectives to create a shared narrative. I paused, meeting Ryan's eyes directly across the length of the table. Narratives are powerful things. They shape how we understand ourselves and how others perceive us. The most meaningful narratives are those grounded in truth and mutual recognition, where each person's contribution is acknowledged accurately and valued appropriately. A subtle shift moved through the room as guests sensed the current flowing beneath my words. I saw Olivia reach for Ryan's hand under the table, either in support or restraint, perhaps both. In creating Ember Salt, I sought to tell a story about food, heritage, and connection that reflected my truest understanding of these elements. Tonight, sharing that story with all of you, especially with my brother on the eve of his wedding, feels like a completion of a circle, a moment of alignment between the reality I've built and the recognition of that reality by those closest to me. I raised my glass higher, offering a smile that contained both genuine affection for my brother and a calm assertion of my own place in our shared story. To Ryan and Olivia, may your marriage be built on a foundation of truth, mutual respect, and the recognition that the most beautiful narratives are those we create together, with each voice honored for its authentic contribution. The toast was met with enthusiastic approval, guests raising their glasses and murmuring agreement. Ryan's expression was complex, a mixture of confusion at the subtext he clearly sensed but couldn't quite articulate, combined with the social performer's instinct to maintain appropriate emotion for the occasion. He raised his glass in acknowledgement, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. As guests began to mingle after dinner concluded, moving from the table to small conversational groups around the restaurant, I circulated through the space, accepting compliments on both the meal and the establishment itself. The shift was palpable. I was no longer being engaged as Ryan's sister who happened to work at a restaurant, but as a successful professional in my own right, who had created something of significant value. Near the end of the evening, as guests were preparing to depart, Olivia's father approached me, his manner more animated than I had observed previously. "Ms. Chen," he began, extending his hand, "I need to apologize for a misconception I've been carrying. Somehow I had the impression that you were primarily the chef here, working for whoever owned this establishment." Ryan never quite corrected that understanding when he spoke about this place. "Please call me Emma," I replied, shaking his hand. "And no apology necessary. Roles in restaurants can be confusing to those outside the industry. Well, regardless, I'm impressed not just with the food, which was extraordinary, but with what you've built here. The integration of concept, execution, and environment demonstrates a remarkable business mind as well as culinary talent." His recognition, so straightforward compared to the contorted acknowledgement I typically received from my own family, was unexpectedly moving. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal." As the last guests departed and only the immediate family remained, my mother approached, slightly flushed from wine and emotion. "Emma, darling, everything was just perfect," she said, embracing me with unusual demonstrativeness. "I had no idea you were so articulate about food. The way you explained each dish was like a university professor." Though her compliment contained the familiar note of surprise that accompanied any recognition of my professional capabilities, I accepted it graciously. "Thank you, Mom. I'm glad you enjoyed the evening." My father, standing awkwardly nearby, added his own assessment. "Good business move, hosting this dinner. Lots of influential people here tonight. Should bring in some new customers." I bit back the explanation that Ember Salt had been fully booked every night since our third month of operation, and that we regularly turned away influential people due to lack of availability. Instead, I simply thanked him for his practical perspective, recognizing it as his version of approval. Ryan and Olivia were the last to leave, my brother's arm draped around his fiancée's shoulders in a gesture that seemed partly affectionate and partly steadying after an evening of considerable wine consumption. "Quite a production, Em," he said, his tone hovering somewhere between compliment and mild challenge. "Didn't realize you were planning to make such a presentation of yourself." Before I could respond, Olivia interjected smoothly. "It was absolutely perfect, Emma. I've never experienced a dinner with such personal meaning behind each element. You've given us a gift that goes far beyond the usual rehearsal dinner." Her sincerity and the subtle pressure she applied to Ryan's arm as she spoke diffused what might have become a more pointed exchange. My brother, perhaps recognizing that he was outnumbered in this moment, pivoted to safer territory. "Yes, everyone loved it," he agreed. Though Harrison did mention the portions were a bit small, just like I predicted. I smiled, letting the minor criticism slide. "I'm glad it met your expectations overall, and I look forward to seeing you both tomorrow at the ceremony." After they left, I remained in the restaurant with my core team for our usual post-event assessment. The kitchen had already been restored to immaculate order under Lucia's supervision, and Marcus had compiled initial feedback from the service staff. "Well?" I asked as we gathered around the bar for a well-earned drink. "Mission accomplished?" "Phase 1 complete," Lucia confirmed, raising her glass. "Your brother's guests definitely left with a clear understanding of who actually runs this place." "And Ryan?" I prompted. Marcus considered the question. "Hard to say. He seemed uncomfortable with the spotlight not centering him, but I'm not sure he fully processed the larger message. Some people have remarkable immune systems when it comes to information that challenges their self-conception. His assessment aligned with my own observations. The evening had certainly shifted perceptions among Ryan's social circle, and perhaps even within my family, but my brother himself seemed capable of absorbing the experience without fundamentally revising his narrative. "That's why we have phase 2, I reminded them, sipping my whiskey. "Tomorrow at the wedding reception." As we clinked glasses to toast the successful completion of the rehearsal dinner, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at the professional execution, relief at the positive reception, and a quiet determination that tomorrow's revelation would complete what tonight had begun. The rehearsal dinner had established my expertise and ownership. The wedding reception would make my position unmistakably clear, even to someone as skilled at narrative revision as my brother. I returned to my apartment that night feeling physically exhausted but mentally energized. The first major component of my wedding weekend strategy had unfolded even more effectively than I had anticipated. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed, with a text from Sophia. "How did it go? Did Ryan's head explode when you revealed your secret identity as a successful human being?" I smiled, typing back. "No explosion yet, but the fuse is lit. Tomorrow comes the real revelation." Her response was immediate. "Can't wait to hear every detail. Get some sleep, restaurant mogul. Tomorrow, you blow their minds." As I drifted towards sleep, I reviewed the day's events and prepared mentally for what would come next. The rehearsal dinner had been about establishing my professional identity through demonstration, showing my expertise, vision, and leadership through the experience itself. Tomorrow's approach would be different, more direct, more impossible to reinterpret or minimize. After years of allowing Ryan to position my accomplishments as peripheral to his own narrative, I was finally reclaiming the central role in my own story. And if my brother couldn't adjust to that reality willingly, then the events I had planned for his wedding reception would make further denial impossible. At my brother's wedding, they called me just a server, while I secretly owned their favorite restaurant. Part 3. The morning of Ryan and Olivia's wedding dawned with perfect autumn clarity, the kind of crystalline October day that photographers dream about. I woke early, my mind already cycling through the details of what I had come to think of as phase 2 of my weekend revelation. While the rehearsal dinner had established my culinary expertise and ownership of Ember and Salt through demonstration, today would bring a more direct and unmistakable clarification of my professional identity. I dressed carefully in the outfit I had selected weeks ago, a tailored navy dress that conveyed appropriate wedding formality while allowing the freedom of movement I would need for what I had planned. As I applied minimal makeup, I received a text from Marcus confirming that everything was set at Evergreen Gardens. My catering station was positioned exactly as requested near the entrance to the reception area, staffed by 2 of our most experienced servers who had been thoroughly briefed on their roles in today's carefully orchestrated plan. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the garden pavilion, with cocktails and appetizers to follow immediately on the adjacent terrace before guests would move into the grand ballroom for dinner and dancing. By noon, I was in my car heading toward the venue, a leather portfolio tucked into my bag containing the final component of my plan. Evergreen Gardens lived up to its reputation as the region's premier wedding venue. Set on 20 acres of manicured grounds with views of both mountains and water, the historic property featured multiple indoor and outdoor spaces connected by winding stone paths through immaculate landscaping. I arrived through the service entrance as previously arranged with the venue coordinator, allowing me to check on my catering setup without encountering family members who were gathering for pre-ceremony photographs. The small dessert station looked perfect. Positioned strategically near the entrance to the ballroom where all guests would pass during the transition from cocktail hour to reception, it featured an elegant display of miniature versions of Ember and Salt's signature desserts. A tasteful sign identified the offerings as specially created for the occasion by Ember Salt, chef owner Emma Chen, with the restaurant's distinctive logo prominently displayed. Phase 2 had officially begun. After confirming all details, with my staff, I made my way to the garden pavilion where family members were gathering before the ceremony. My parents spotted me immediately, my mother rushing over with a look of mild panic. "Emma, there you are. We were beginning to worry. The photographer wants family pictures in 15 minutes. Is that what you're wearing? I thought you might wear the pink dress from Cousin May's wedding." I smiled, recognizing the familiar rhythm of my mother's anxiety-driven commentary. "This is what I'm wearing, Mom. Navy is more appropriate for an October wedding than pink." My father joined us, adjusting his tie nervously. "The rehearsal? Dinner was quite nice, Emma. Very fancy food. Did it cost the restaurant a lot to provide all that wine?" His question reflected our family's long-standing disconnect regarding my professional reality. After all this time, my father still conceptualized me as an employee rather than the owner who made financial decisions for the business. "The restaurant absorbed the cost as my gift to Ryan and Olivia," I explained patiently. "It was my decision to provide the premium wine pairings." He nodded, processing this information without quite integrating it into his understanding of my role. "Well, very generous of your boss to allow that." Before I could correct him again, we were called for family photographs, a process that occupied the next 30 minutes with various combinations of parents, siblings, and soon-to-be in-laws, arranged in picturesque groupings around the venue's scenic spots. Throughout the photo session, Ryan maintained his characteristic center-of-attention energy, directing people into positions and suggesting angles to the photographer with the confident authority of someone who believes themselves particularly photogenic. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the conventional way of high-end weddings. Olivia looked genuinely stunning in a classic gown that suited her elegant poise. Ryan performed his groom role with the polished charm that had always made him successful in social situations. Their personally written vows contained the expected promises of support and partnership, with Ryan's including a slightly self-congratulatory anecdote about how he had pursued Olivia despite her initial reluctance, eventually winning her over through strategic persistence. As I listened, seated between my parents in the front row reserved for immediate family, I found myself wondering if Olivia recognized the subtle narrative positioning in Ryan's telling, how even their love story centered his agency and vision rather than their mutual connection. From my limited interactions with her, I suspected she was far more perceptive about my brother's tendencies than he realized. After the ceremony concluded and the newlyweds recessed down the aisle amid applause and scattered rose petals, guests moved to the terrace for cocktails and appetizers. I circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations on being sister of the groom, and deflecting the occasional comment about the previous night's dinner with gracious acknowledgement. "The food last night was extraordinary," said an elegant older woman who introduced herself as Olivia's godmother. "Ryan mentioned you helped arrange it. Do you work in the restaurant business?" The opening was perfect, exactly the kind of conversational doorway I had anticipated. "Actually, I own Ember Salt," I replied with a warm smile. "I founded it after training as a chef in New York, Copenhagen, and Osaka." Her expression registered pleasant surprise. "Oh, I had the impression from something Ryan said that you were primarily a chef there. How wonderful to have created such a successful establishment." "Thank you. It's been my life's work for the past 2 years," I said, using the opportunity to correct the misconception without directly criticizing my brother. This approach, gentle but clear correction, was one I repeated throughout the cocktail hour, laying groundwork for what would come next. As the cocktail reception neared its conclusion, I positioned myself near my dessert station, greeting guests as they began moving toward the ballroom entrance for the dinner portion of the evening. Many stopped to admire and sample the beautifully presented miniature desserts, giving me natural opportunities to introduce myself as the owner and creator of both these offerings and the restaurant that had hosted the previous night's dinner. The venue coordinator appeared with her clipboard, checking that everything was proceeding according to schedule. "The bride and groom are about to make their entrance," she informed me. "We'll be moving everyone into the ballroom in about 5 minutes." I thanked her for the update, then glanced at my watch. The timing was perfect. I signaled discreetly to my staff, who smoothly began the transition we had rehearsed, transforming the dessert station into something more intentionally eye-catching. One server brought out a small stand with the restaurant's most recent national magazine feature prominently displayed, while the other added a digital picture frame cycling through beautifully shot images of Ember and Salt's interior, signature dishes, and me at work in the kitchen. As guests funneled toward the ballroom entrance, many paused at this enhanced display, examining the magazine cover that featured me in chef's whites against the backdrop of my restaurant's distinctive wood-fired hearth. The digital frame attracted particular attention as it cycled through professional photographs of the restaurant's most iconic dishes, many of which guests had experienced at the rehearsal dinner. "Is that you on the cover of Food and Wine?" asked one of Ryan's colleagues, stopping to examine the magazine display. "Yes, they did a feature on Ember and Salt after we were named Restaurant of the Year," I explained. "It was quite an honor, especially for a relatively new establishment." Our conversation attracted others, creating a small cluster of interested guests around the station. I noticed Ryan's college roommate among them, his expression shifting from casual interest to confusion as he looked from the magazine to me and back again. "Wait," he said. "I thought you just worked at the restaurant that did the rehearsal dinner. Ryan always talks about his sister, the chef, but he never mentioned you owned the place." His comment, louder than our previous conversation, drew more attention. I smiled calmly, prepared for exactly this moment of clarification. "I founded Ember and Salt 2 years ago after returning from training abroad," I explained to the growing audience. "It's been a wonderful journey, culminating in the national recognition we've received recently. I was delighted to host Ryan and Olivia's rehearsal dinner as my gift to them." The ripple effect was immediate and visible, guests exchanging glances, processing this information against whatever Ryan had previously told them about my role. I could almost see the mental recalibrations taking place as they reconciled my brother's characterizations with the evidence now directly before them. This carefully orchestrated moment of revelation was interrupted by the venue coordinator's announcement that the bride and groom were about to make their entrance. Guests moved toward the ballroom doors, many glancing back at me with newfound interest or, in some cases, slight embarrassment that suggested they were recalling previous interactions based on misunderstood information. I followed the crowd into the ballroom, where tables were arranged around a central dance floor, each setting immaculately prepared with floral centerpieces in autumn tones that complemented the venue's elegant decor. As the sister of the groom, I was seated at the family table nearest the head table where Ryan and Olivia would preside. The newlyweds made their entrance to enthusiastic applause, Ryan beaming with the particular satisfaction of someone who believes they have orchestrated a perfect event. They proceeded to the head table, where they remained standing as Ryan took the microphone for a welcome address. "Olivia and I are overwhelmed by the love in this room," he began, his voice carrying that practiced public speaking cadence he had perfected during his college debate team days. "Before we sit down to this incredible dinner, I want to thank everyone who helped make this weekend so special." He proceeded through acknowledgments of his parents, Olivia's parents, the wedding planner, and various friends who had participated in the ceremony. When he reached the part about the rehearsal dinner, I listened with particular attention. "And, of course, a special thanks to my sister Emma for helping arrange last night's amazing dinner at Ember and Salt," he said, gesturing in my direction. "She pulled some strings with the chef, and I think everyone would agree the food was exceptional." The mischaracterization was so complete, so breathtakingly revisionist after the previous night's explicit demonstrations of my ownership and culinary direction, that I actually laughed out loud. a short surprise sound that was fortunately covered by the general applause following his acknowledgement. My mother, seated beside me, whispered, "That was nice of Ryan to thank you publicly." I didn't bother responding, my attention focused on the next phase of my plan. The real revelation would come during the reception's traditional toasts, scheduled to begin after the main course. I had not been asked to give a speech. Ryan had selected his best man and Olivia's maid of honor for the formal toasts, but the wedding coordinator had accommodated my request to add a brief additional toast, following the official ones, presenting it to the couple as a special surprise from the sister of the groom. Dinner proceeded with the choreographed precision characteristic of high-end wedding receptions. I engaged pleasantly with my table companions, which included 2 of my cousins and their spouses, along with my parents and Olivia's maternal grandmother. Throughout the meal, I noticed occasional glances from guests at other tables, particularly those who had seen the magazine display, their expressions suggesting continued processing of the disconnect between Ryan's characterization and the emerging reality. After the main course was cleared, the best man rose for the traditional first toast. His speech followed the expected formula of college anecdotes and lighthearted teasing, culminating in heartfelt good wishes for the couple's future. The maid of honor followed with a more emotional tribute to her friendship with Olivia, including tasteful references to how Ryan had proven himself worthy of her friend through his persistence and charm. When these official toasts concluded, the wedding coordinator approached the microphone. "Before we continue with the cake cutting, we have a special additional toast from the sister of the groom, Emma Chen." There was a murmur of interest as I rose and moved toward the microphone. Ryan's expression registered surprise, followed by a flicker of concern. He hadn't been informed about this addition to the program. Olivia, beside him, appeared genuinely curious rather than alarmed. I took the microphone with the calm assurance I had developed through years of managing high-pressure professional environments. After a moment to survey the room, I began speaking in the measured, engaging tone I used when describing special dishes to valued restaurant guests. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting personally, I'm Emma Chen, Ryan's sister, and the founder and owner of Ember Salt, where many of you enjoyed the rehearsal dinner last night. This opening line alone created a visible reaction rippling through the audience. I continued smoothly, maintaining warm eye contact with various guests. Family relationships are fascinating ecosystems. They form our earliest understanding of ourselves and continue shaping our identities long into adulthood. My relationship with Ryan has been no exception. I turned slightly to address my brother directly, offering a smile that balanced affection with clear intent. Ryan has always possessed a remarkable talent for storytelling. From our earliest childhood games, he could spin ordinary moments into grand adventures, usually casting himself as the hero while generously allowing me supporting roles in his narratives. Soft laughter moved through the room as guests recognized the good-natured sibling dynamics I was describing. Ryan maintained his social smile, though his eyes had narrowed slightly in recognition that this toast was taking an unexpected direction. As we grew up, Ryan's gift for narrative continued developing. He became adept at positioning himself advantageously in every story, a skill that has served him well in business and social circles alike. It's one of his most characteristic traits, this ability to create and maintain a particular version of reality through sheer narrative confidence. I paused, letting this observation settle across the room. Several of Ryan's friends nodded in recognition, exchanging knowing glances. Olivia's expression was particularly interesting, a mixture of surprise at my directness and what appeared to be appreciative recognition of the accuracy of my assessment. Over the past year, I've observed with fascination as Ryan constructed a very specific narrative about my restaurant, Ember Salt. In this narrative, he positioned himself as specially connected to the establishment's success, an insider with privileged access and influence, while simultaneously minimizing my role from founder and owner to, variously, my sister who works there, the chef, or most recently, someone who pulled some strings to arrange his rehearsal dinner. The room had grown very quiet, attention completely focused on my words. Ryan's smile had frozen in place, his eyes now communicating a clear warning that I was deliberately ignored. I found this particularly interesting since Ember Salt represents the culmination of my lifelong passion for food, years of international training, and the investment of my entire inheritance from our grandfather. The restaurant that many of you experienced last night exists solely because of my vision, determination, and professional expertise, a fact that has been recognized by national publications and culinary awards, if not always by my own brother. I lifted my champagne glass, my voice warming as I moved toward the conclusion of my toast. But this isn't a story about correction or criticism. It's about clarity and truth as foundations for meaningful relationships. As Ryan and Olivia begin their marriage, I offer this wish, that they build their partnership on the solid ground of mutual recognition, seeing each other accurately and valuing each other's authentic contributions rather than convenient narratives. I turned fully toward the head table, making direct eye contact with both Ryan and Olivia. To the newly married couple, may your life together be characterized by honest appreciation for each other's true capabilities and accomplishments. May you resist the temptation to reshape each other's realities to fit more comfortable stories. And may you discover, as I have in my professional journey, that the most satisfying success comes not from others' perceptions, but from the quiet knowledge of what you have genuinely created. I raised my glass higher. To Ryan and Olivia, congratulations and every happiness in your future together. The toast was met with enthusiastic applause that contained notes of surprised appreciation and, from some quarters, a kind of relieved recognition, as though certain guests had long sensed the dynamics I had just articulated, but never expected them to be addressed so directly. As I returned to my seat, I caught various reactions around the room. My parents appeared stunned, processing this public clarification of family dynamics they had tacitly enabled for years. Several of Ryan's friends were exchanging significant glances, suggesting this revelation confirmed suspicions they had previously harbored. Olivia's family seemed intrigued rather than uncomfortable, particularly her father, who was studying me with newfound interest. Ryan's expression was the most complex, a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and rapid calculation as he assessed how to respond to this unexpected repositioning of our relationship narrative in front of everyone whose perception mattered to him. Beside him, Olivia surprised me by raising her glass directly to me in what appeared to be genuine acknowledgement, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The moment was broken by the wedding coordinator smoothly transitioning to the cake-cutting ceremony, moving the event forward with professional efficiency. As guests' attention shifted to this traditional ritual, I remained quietly in my seat, experiencing neither triumph nor regret, but rather a calm satisfaction at having finally established clarity after years of accumulated misrepresentation. The remainder of the reception unfolded according to the standard wedding template: cake cutting, first dance, parent dances, and eventually the opening of the dance floor to all guests. I participated appropriately in each component, maintaining pleasant social engagement while observing the aftermath of my revelation rippling through various conversations around the room. It was during this portion of the evening that Sophia arrived, having attended only the reception part of the wedding due to work commitments earlier in the day. She found me near the bar where I was waiting for a glass of water. "Did I miss it?" she asked immediately, scanning my face for clues. "The great revelation? Your text just said mission accomplished, but I need details." I smiled, genuinely, happy to see my oldest friend and the person who had most consistently recognized the dynamics I had finally addressed publicly. "You missed the formal toast, but you're just in time for the fallout." I briefly recounted my speech and the visible reactions it had generated throughout the room. Sophia listened with growing delight. occasionally glancing toward Ryan, who was currently performing enthusiastic dance moves in the center of a circle of friends. "He seems to be recovering quickly," she observed. "Surface recovery is Ryan's specialty," I replied. "But notice how he hasn't made eye contact with me since the toast. He's recalibrating, trying to determine how to integrate this new public understanding into his self-narrative without admitting he's been misrepresenting everything for years." Sophia shook her head with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "The cognitive gymnastics must be exhausting. But what about your parents? How are they processing this public clarification of their golden child's revisionist tendencies?" I glanced toward my parents, who were seated at a table with several older relatives, my father looking slightly shell-shocked while my mother maintained animated conversation with practiced social determination. I think they're experiencing the uncomfortable recognition that they've been complicit in Ryan's narrative distortions. They've always accepted his versions of reality because they were simpler and aligned with their preferences. Having that pattern exposed publicly creates a cognitive dissonance they're not equipped to process immediately. "And how do you feel?" Sophia asked, her tone shifting from amusement to genuine concern. This was years in the making. I considered the question carefully. Surprisingly peaceful. It wasn't about embarrassing Ryan or claiming credit. It was about establishing clarity, creating a foundation of truth that future interactions can build upon, whether in family relationships or professional contexts. "Well, I think it was long overdue and perfectly executed," Sophia declared, raising her champagne glass in a private toast. "To clarity and truth. May they eventually penetrate even Ryan's reality-resistant consciousness." We clinked glasses, sharing a moment of simple friendship that felt particularly valuable amid the complex family dynamics swirling around us. Our conversation was interrupted, however, by the approach of an elegant older man I recognized as Harrison Davis, the former college linebacker whose appetite Ryan had been particularly concerned about at the rehearsal dinner. "Ms. Chen, I'm Harrison Davis, a colleague of Ryan's," he introduced himself with unexpected formality. "I wanted to compliment you on your restaurant. Last night's dinner was exceptional, among the best meals I've experienced, and I've dined all over the world." "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'm glad you enjoyed it," I replied, genuinely appreciative of his specific acknowledgement. I was particularly impressed by the coherent vision across every aspect of the experience, from the architectural choices to the service choreography to the progression of flavors throughout the meal. It demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of hospitality that's increasingly rare. His observation, so much more perceptive than I would have expected from Ryan's description of him as primarily concerned with portion size, caught me by surprise. "That's very kind and remarkably insightful," I said. "The integration of all elements of the dining experience is exactly what I focused on when developing the concept." Harrison nodded, then continued with an unexpected candor. "I should also say that your toast this evening clarified some inconsistencies I'd noticed in how Ryan spoke about your establishment. He's a valued colleague with many strengths, but perhaps accuracy in representing others' accomplishments isn't chief among them." The diplomatic understatement made me smile. "That's a very gracious way of putting it. In business, we learn to verify independently rather than accepting colleague characterizations at face value," he said with a knowing look, though family dynamics obviously complicate that process. "Indeed they do," I agreed. "Well, I won't take more of your time," Harrison concluded. "But I wanted you to know that many of us recognize the significance of your clarification this evening, and I'll be making my own reservations at Ember and Salt in the future without going through your brother as an intermediary." After he departed, Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Not everyone in Ryan's circle is as narrative susceptible as he might believe." "Apparently not," I agreed, finding unexpected satisfaction in this additional confirmation that my brother's revisionism had not been universally accepted even before my public clarification. As the evening progressed, I noticed Olivia making her way toward me through the crowd of dancing guests. She moved with the particular careful grace of a bride who has been in uncomfortable formal shoes for many hours, yet maintains perfect composure. "Do you have a moment?" she asked, gesturing toward the terrace doors where the evening air offered a respite from the increasingly warm and noisy ballroom. We stepped outside into the cool October night, fairy lights illuminating the stone terrace that overlooked the venue's extensive gardens. Olivia leaned against the balustrade with a small sigh that communicated both physical relief and emotional fatigue. "Your toast was unexpected," she said after a moment, her tone neutral but not accusatory. "I imagine so," I replied. "Ryan didn't know I'd arranged to speak?" She nodded slowly. "I assumed as much from his expression, but I wasn't. Referring to the surprise factor, I meant the content. It was remarkably direct." "Too direct for a wedding reception?" I asked, genuinely interested in her perspective. Olivia considered this, her expression thoughtful. "Under normal circumstances, perhaps. But there was nothing malicious in your delivery. Just a calm establishment of reality after what I'm gathering has been years of progressive narrative distortion." Her assessment was so precisely aligned with my own understanding that I felt an unexpected surge of respect for my new sister-in-law's perceptiveness. "You don't seem particularly surprised by the substance of what I shared," I observed. A small, elegant shrug. "Let's just say I've noticed certain patterns in how Ryan positions himself relative to others' accomplishments. It's something I've been working on with him privately." This revelation, that Olivia was not only aware of Ryan's tendencies, but actively addressing them, shifted my understanding of their relationship significantly. "I hadn't realized," I admitted. "Ryan has many genuine strengths," she continued. "He's extraordinarily loyal, deeply generous with those he cares about, and capable of real empathy when he moves beyond his self-narrative. But this particular habit, repositioning others' achievements to enhance his own standing, is something I've made clear needs to change if our partnership is to succeed long-term." Her candor was refreshing after years of family dynamics that tacitly reinforced Ryan's revisionist tendencies. "That's remarkably clear-eyed." Olivia smiled slightly. "I'm a corporate litigator. Clear assessment of reality versus narrative is a professional requirement." "Does Ryan understand your perspective on this?" I asked, genuinely curious about the internal dynamics of their relationship. "We're working on it," she replied diplomatically. "Your toast this evening will likely accelerate that process, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes external clarification can catalyze internal reflection that might otherwise take years." There was wisdom in her assessment that suggested she understood not just Ryan's patterns, but the most effective approaches to addressing them constructively, something my more direct confrontations over the years had never quite accomplished. "In that case, I hope the timing proves useful rather than disruptive to your celebration," I said. "Oh, Ryan will be fine," Olivia said with the confident assurance of someone who understood her partner's recovery capabilities. "His initial reaction will be defensive recalibration, followed by a period of revisionist integration, eventually settling into a new narrative that allows him to maintain self-image while accommodating the undeniable public clarification you provided." Her precise description of Ryan's predictable pattern of response was so accurate that I laughed in surprised recognition. "You really do understand him." "I wouldn't have married him otherwise," she said simply. "Understanding your partner's patterns, both strengths and limitations, is fundamental to building something sustainable." Our conversation was interrupted by the wedding coordinator appearing at the terrace door. "Mrs. Mitchell, the photographer, is ready for the final staged photos before your departure." Olivia nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to me. "I should go. But Emma, thank you for the incredible rehearsal dinner. It was genuinely one of the most meaningful dining experiences I've ever had. And regardless of how Ryan has characterized your professional accomplishments, I want you to know that I recognize and respect what you've built. Her direct acknowledgement, so different from my family's perpetual surprise at my success, meant more than I had anticipated. Thank you. That means a great deal coming from someone whose own professional accomplishments are so significant. Sisters-in-law who see each other clearly, she said with a small smile. Perhaps that's the beginning of a more accurate family narrative moving forward. As she returned to the ballroom to join Ryan for their final wedding photographs, I remained on the terrace, contemplating this unexpected alliance with my brother's wife. Whatever I had anticipated from this weekend of revelations, it wasn't this potential for new understanding with Olivia. A connection based on mutual recognition and clear assessment rather than convenient narratives. The night air carried the first hint of genuine autumn chill, a reminder that seasons were changing, not just in the natural world, but in my family's dynamics and my own professional standing. After years of allowing my accomplishments to be reframed and minimized in service of my brother's preferred narratives, I had finally established unmistakable clarity about my role and achievements. The wedding reception continued inside, the celebratory sounds of music and laughter floating through the open terrace doors. Soon, there would be the traditional departure of the bride and groom amid sparklers and well-wishes, followed by the gradual dispersal of guests into the night. Tomorrow would bring family brunch and inevitable processing of the evening's revelations, with all the complex recalibrations such clarifications required. But for this moment, standing alone under the October stars with the satisfying knowledge that truth had finally been spoken aloud, I felt a profound sense of alignment between my external reality and internal understanding, a harmony that no one else's narrative could distort again. The morning after Ryan and Olivia's wedding brought the traditional post-wedding brunch, hosted at a lakeside restaurant near the venue. As I drove there, autumn sunlight gilded the shoreline, creating a postcard-perfect backdrop for what promised to be an interesting family gathering. After my revelatory toast the previous evening, I anticipated some awkwardness, particularly from Ryan and my parents. What I hadn't expected was the shift in how extended family and wedding guests would perceive me. I arrived at the restaurant, 15 minutes early, parking my car and taking a moment to prepare for whatever dynamics awaited inside. The establishment was a local institution, the kind of place that served reliable, upscale comfort food in a setting designed to showcase waterfront views. As I walked in, I noticed Olivia's parents already seated at the large central table, reserved for the event. They were deep in conversation with my mother, who was gesturing animatedly in that particular way she had when attempting to smooth over potentially uncomfortable social situations. Olivia's father noticed me first, raising a hand in greeting and, to my surprise, standing as I approached the table. "Emma, we were just discussing your remarkable restaurant. Your mother tells us you designed the entire concept yourself after training internationally." My mother's expression was a fascinating study in conflicted emotions, pride in my accomplishments now that they had been explicitly recognized by others, combined with discomfort at having her previous minimization of them implicitly highlighted. "Yes," I confirmed, taking a seat. "The restaurant represents the culmination of training across 3 continents, combined with my vision for showcasing local ingredients through globally influenced techniques." "Extraordinary," said Olivia's mother, with what appeared to be genuine interest. "We were just telling your mother that we'd love to arrange a private dinner at Ember Salt next month. We host a charity board meeting annually, and the experience you created for the rehearsal dinner would be perfect." This request, addressing me directly as the decision-maker rather than suggesting they might speak to Ryan about his connection to the restaurant, represented exactly the shift in perception I had hoped my weekend revelations would create. "I'd be delighted to host your board," I replied. "Our private dining coordinator can work with you on the details." More guests arrived, filling the restaurant with the particular energy of post-wedding gatherings, a mixture of lingering celebration and collective recovery from the previous night's festivities. I noticed an interesting pattern emerging as people greeted me. Several of Ryan's friends and colleagues approached with comments that subtly acknowledged their revised understanding of my professional position. "That duck dish at the rehearsal dinner was incredible," said one of Ryan's law school friends. "I had no idea you'd trained in Japan. The precision in the flavors was remarkable." Another guest, a woman who had been seated at my table during the wedding reception, mentioned that she had already made a reservation at Ember Salt for her anniversary dinner. "I'm so glad to have the personal connection," she said. "Getting reservations has become nearly impossible since the national recognition you've received." These interactions continued throughout the morning, small but significant acknowledgments that the narrative had been permanently altered. My professional identity was no longer filtered through Ryan's strategic repositioning, but recognized directly and accurately. Ryan and Olivia arrived 30 minutes into the brunch, making the traditional newlywed entrance to applause and congratulations. Ryan moved through the space with his characteristic confidence, though I noticed he carefully avoided direct interaction with me as he greeted guests and family members. Olivia, by contrast, made a point of coming to where I was seated, embracing me warmly. "Good morning, sister-in-law," she said with a genuine smile. "I hope you slept well after all the excitement." "Better than expected," I replied. "How about you? First night as a married couple?" "Perfect, except for the fact that Ryan insisted on checking his work emails before we'd even had breakfast," she said, with an affectionate eye roll that suggested this was a familiar pattern she had made peace with. "We're still debating whether that violates the spirit of our honeymoon agreement." Our easy conversation was interrupted by my father appearing at my elbow, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Emma, could I speak with you for a moment? Privately?" Excusing myself, I followed him to a quiet corner of the restaurant's deck overlooking the lake. My father had always been the more emotionally reserved parent, uncomfortable with direct discussions of feelings or relationship dynamics. His request for a private conversation was unusual enough to pique my curiosity. He stood awkwardly for a moment, looking out at the water rather than at me. "Your speech last night," he began, then paused as if reconsidering his approach. "It was very clear." I waited, allowing him the space to formulate whatever he was struggling to express. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Ryan's characterization of your restaurant," he continued, "and I realize I may have contributed to that misunderstanding by not fully recognizing the nature of your professional position." This acknowledgement, halting and uncomfortable as it was, represented a significant shift from my father, who had consistently viewed my culinary career as a curious detour rather than a legitimate professional path. "It's been difficult for me to understand the restaurant business," he admitted. "In my generation, cooking was considered, well, not a professional career in the same way as law or medicine or business. I didn't have the framework to properly evaluate your accomplishments." I was touched by his attempt at reconciliation, however awkwardly expressed. "I understand that, Dad. The culinary world has changed dramatically in recent decades. Your mother showed me the magazine article this morning, the one they displayed at your station during the reception," he said. "It was very impressive. The journalist called you a visionary and compared your influence to chefs I've actually heard of." I smiled at this characteristically practical metric of success, being compared to chefs famous enough that my father had heard their names. The restaurant industry has its own measures of achievement, just like any other professional field. National recognition and awards serve the same function as partner promotions or surgical credentials in other careers. He nodded slowly, processing this framework that made my accomplishments more comprehensible to him. "I'm proud of what you've built, Emma. I should have said that more clearly before now." His simple statement, delivered without qualification or redirection, meant more than I had anticipated. Thank you, Dad. That means a great deal to me. We rejoined the brunch gathering, where conversations and mimosas were flowing freely. Ryan had positioned himself at the center of a group of his friends, recounting what appeared to be highlights from the wedding reception. As I passed near their table, I caught fragments of his characteristic storytelling. Absolutely. Insisted that Emma should give an unscheduled toast. I knew she was nervous about public speaking, but I told the coordinator to add her to the program anyway. She's always been so shy about her accomplishments. I've been trying to help her develop more professional confidence for years. I almost laughed aloud at this breathtaking revision of reality. How within hours, Ryan had transformed my deliberately planned, confidence-asserting toast into another narrative that positioned him as the supportive big brother encouraging his reticent sister. His adaptability was genuinely impressive, if somewhat pathological in its reflexive self-centering. Sophia joined me at that moment, having arrived late to the brunch. She followed my gaze to Ryan's table and raised an eyebrow. Already rewriting history? With remarkable efficiency, I confirmed. Apparently, I was too shy to speak publicly about my accomplishments, so Ryan heroically intervened to ensure I had the opportunity. Sophia shook her head in amazement. The speed of the revisionist machinery is truly something to behold. Does he actually believe these adjustments, or is it conscious myth-making? I think it's somewhere in between, I replied, watching my brother gesture expansively as his audience nodded along. The adjustments happen so automatically that they're practically unconscious, but at some level, he must recognize the original reality he's revising. And how do you feel about it today? Sophia asked. Now that you've made your position unmistakably clear to everyone who matters professionally. I considered the question carefully. Interestingly, at peace. I accomplished what I set out to do, establishing clarity about my professional identity and accomplishments in a way that can't be reinterpreted or minimized. Ryan will continue his narrative adjustments, but they no longer have the power to shape others' understanding of my work. Our conversation was interrupted by Marcus calling my cell phone. I excused myself to take the call, stepping away from the brunch gathering. Sorry to bother you during family time, he began, but I thought you'd want to know immediately. The James Beard Foundation just announced the semi-finalists for this year's awards. Ember Salt is nominated for Best New Restaurant nationally, and you're on the list for Rising Star Chef. The news momentarily took my breath away. James Beard nominations represented the highest level of recognition in the American culinary world, the equivalent of Oscar nominations for restaurants and chefs. That's extraordinary, I managed, processing the significance of this professional milestone. When will they announce finalists? In 6 weeks, Marcus replied. But even the semi-finalist nomination is generating immediate reservation requests. Our online system crashed 20 minutes ago from the volume. After finishing the call with arrangements to meet my team later that afternoon, I rejoined the brunch with a sense of professional fulfillment entirely separate from the family dynamics that had occupied my attention throughout the wedding weekend. This recognition, from the most respected culinary institution in the country, existed completely independent of any narrative Ryan might construct about my work. As I settled back at my table, Olivia approached, champagne flute in hand. Good news? She asked, gesturing to my phone. You have the expression of someone who just received significant professional recognition. Her perceptiveness continued to impress me. James Beard Award nominations were just announced. Ember Salt is in the running for Best New Restaurant, and I'm nominated in the Rising Star Chef category. That's fantastic, Emma, she said with evident sincerity. We should announce it to everyone here. It's perfect timing with the family gathered. Before I could respond, she had tapped her glass with a spoon, calling for attention. The room quieted as guests turned toward her expectantly. I've just learned some exciting news that I think deserves immediate celebration, Olivia announced. Emma has just received word that she and her restaurant have been nominated for the James Beard Awards, essentially the Oscars of the culinary world. I think that calls for a toast." The room erupted in spontaneous applause and congratulations. Even my parents looked genuinely pleased, particularly my father, who had a new framework for understanding the significance of this professional recognition. Glasses were raised around the room as Olivia continued. "To Emma, whose vision, expertise, and determination have created not just a successful business, but a nationally recognized culinary destination. We're all proud to have witnessed your journey." As glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, I caught Ryan's expression across the room. For a brief moment, his careful social mask slipped, revealing a complex mixture of emotions. Surprise at the nomination, calculation about how to position himself relative to this new development, and perhaps even a flicker of genuine pride in his sister's accomplishment. Then the moment passed, and I watched with a mixture of amusement and resignation as he smoothly integrated this new information into his evolving narrative, turning to his friends with an expression of insider knowledge. "The James Beard committees have been interested in Ember Salt since they first opened," he informed his circle confidently. "I actually introduced Emma to one of the regional judges at a business dinner last year. This blatant fabrication, I had never met any James Beard judge through Ryan, might once have frustrated me intensely. Now it simply confirmed that my brother would continue being exactly who he had always been, regardless of my weekend of revelations. The difference was that his revisionism no longer had the power to shape others' perceptions of my work. As the brunch began winding down, guests departing in waves to catch flights or begin drives home, I found myself in a quiet moment with Olivia and Ryan near the restaurant entrance. The proximity created a brief awkwardness as Ryan and I hadn't directly interacted since my toast the previous evening. Olivia, perceptive as always, created a graceful opening. "Emma, I can't thank you enough for everything you contributed to our wedding weekend. The rehearsal dinner was unforgettable, and having your special desserts at the reception added such a personal touch." "It was my pleasure," I replied sincerely. "I'm happy I could contribute something meaningful to your celebration." Ryan shifted uncomfortably before finally meeting my eyes directly. "The dinner was excellent," he acknowledged, the compliment both genuine and carefully limited to the food, rather than recognizing the broader significance of hosting the event in my restaurant. It was exactly the level of acknowledgement I had expected, a small concession to reality without fundamentally revising his preferred narrative. And for the first time, I found I could accept this limited recognition with equanimity rather than frustration. "Congratulations again to both of you," I said, embracing first Olivia and then, briefly, Ryan. "Enjoy your honeymoon." As they departed for the airport and their 2-week trip to Kyoto, I felt a sense of completion that extended beyond the wedding weekend. The cycle of revelation and recalibration had unfolded largely as I had anticipated, with the unexpected bonus of connection with Olivia and the professional milestone of the James Beard nominations providing additional layers of satisfaction. Later that afternoon, I returned to Ember Salt for an impromptu celebration with my team. The restaurant was closed to the public on Sundays, but the space hummed with the energy of staff members who had gathered to mark our nomination. Lucia had prepared a special staff meal, while Marcus had opened several bottles of champagne that we had been saving for a significant occasion. Standing in the center of the restaurant I had created, surrounded by people who recognized and valued my vision without qualification or revision, I experienced a moment of perfect professional clarity. Whatever narratives my brother might continue constructing about his proximity to my success, the fundamental reality remained unchanged. Ember Salt existed because of my expertise, determination, and creative direction. As we raised glasses to celebrate our collective achievement, I found myself reflecting on the parallel journeys of the weekend. the public clarification of my professional identity within my family, and the national recognition of that same professional identity within my industry. Both represented important milestones in the establishment of an unrevised reality, a clear-eyed recognition of what I had built and who I had become. The restaurant glowed in the late afternoon sunlight, the amber tones that had inspired its name illuminating the space that represented my life's work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, managing the increased demand from the James Beard nomination, preparing for the upcoming judgment period, continuing to evolve our culinary offerings to maintain the standard that had earned this recognition. But today, in this moment of alignment between internal confidence and external validation, I allowed myself to simply appreciate the journey that had brought me here, not as Ryan's sister who worked at that restaurant, but as Emma Chen, chef and owner of Ember Salt, telling my own story in my own voice, finally and unmistakably clear. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.